Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Purple Ponderings with Pankaj. Today, we have a very unusually interesting guest, Tony Cotto. Uh, we try and get people from wearing different hats in the industry, and Tony is someone who's very distinctively different. So, Tony, with let me hand it over to you, and if you want to share a little bit about your background, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I'm happy to, and I'm happy to chat today and talk about some of the really interesting stuff happening in and around this industry. As you mentioned, I'm with NAMIC, the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. We're a trade organization that represents about over 1,400 different insurance carriers and market participants at this point. More than two-thirds of the auto and home industry. And everyone from, all of your national gigantic writers who are not publicly traded, as well as the 3 county farm mutuals in Iowa and Wyoming that only write within their little geographic area and do so really well. It's a role I've been in for about a year. And I promise, the COVID meltdown had nothing to do with me joining NAMIC. That was totally unrelated. No. I've been there as the director of auto and underwriting for the last year. It's a new role that they created, sort of looking back at the last year. It was incredibly prescient to say, where are the attacks going to come against our members is going to be on the auto and underwriting space for sure, especially given what's unfolded in the last 11 months. So it's been really interesting, and I'll preface our entire conversation saying that my remarks here are not to be taken on behalf of NAMIC. I'm here in my own capacity, and they're my views, not those of NAMIC or any of our member companies. Where we have staked out a position, I'm happy to lay that out, but generally speaking, it'll be my thoughts. And in terms of background, I come to NAMIC after about 15 years in and around politics and regulation. So and always with an eye on the insurance side. I'm not I know a lot of the folks you talk to tend to be on the tech side, on the startup side, the insure tech universe that likes to sort of have this self-perpetuating, group of folks who, oh, what a great idea. We'll disrupt. That's not where I'm from. That's not where I'm coming from. I come at this from the politics of insurance, which I find fascinating, the regulation of insurance, because I used to be at the NAIC and I used to be at the cabinet that oversaw the Kentucky Department of Insurance. And then I come at it from how does that all interact with what the companies need to do to make money and to protect their policyholders. So that intersection of the politics, the regulation, and the insurance is where my home and my head are at. And it's why I find it fascinating to talk to folks from the startup world and from the insurtech universe who have, I won't say they don't ever have a clue, but they are extraordinarily naive when talking about regulation and laws and politics. And they're just sort of things that get in the way for a lot of startups and insurtechs. Whereas for those of us who live this and have lived this as a career, that's where it all happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that great background introduction. And, you said there's regulation and there's politics and there's insurance. I'm going to add a fourth angle to it, which is emerging technology.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now if you throw in all of those, that's a nice potpourri of stuff that can happen. Right. And your, background is so fascinating. I'm going to start by first asking you, and you and I have had chats previously, and like you said, a lot of the startups who are especially new to insurance kind of come in wanting to do things using technology, and then they run into, oh my God, there's regulations, and these regulations seem archaic. They seem to have been built by people who hate technology and hate like the the benefit of the industry. That's the perception, right? So
Uh-huh.
I want you to just come at it at, there's obviously a balanced view of what that should be. But talk to me first a little bit about like what is the extremes, right? The unbalanced view. What if there's too much regulation? What if there's too less regulation in politics? So just so from your perspective, right? Because I'm sure you've seen both angles and sort of
Absolutely.
have had the opportunity to provide a balanced point of view. I'd like for you to just explain for the benefit of our viewers, what does that look like?
Sure. And I think so, for better or worse, probably worse, politics and laws and regulations are a people business. So the people who sit in the chairs matter. The people who sit in as the chairman of the insurance committee in your state, that matters. Who sits in the insurance commissioner's office matters, because they have very different views on these things that you're talking about, on where that sort of lever of regulation, if I tilt it this way, I'm over regulating. If I tilt it this way, then my consumers are at risk. And I will tell you that across the board, the way regulators in the US view their job is to protect consumers. That's the beginning and the end of it. Okay. There's more to it than just that. And there's different attitudes on how you protect consumers, but that is going to be number one on any regulator's list. My job is to protect consumers, the people who buy insurance policies. Now, how do you do that? That's where you start to get into all the other fun discussions that we're going to have. But in terms of overprotecting versus underprotecting, I think every regulator is going to err on the side of overprotecting consumers and saying, I need to protect that person who is the least capable of protecting themselves, right? Whether it's people who can't read a policy, whether it's people who don't understand what's been sold to them by their agent or direct channel or whatever it is, they're going to err on the side of, I want to protect that consumer. Now, they also have a secondary responsibility to protect the market in their state, right? Because if the market dries up and nobody wants to write in your state because you're a really nasty regulator, then you've created a different problem, because now I have a lot of people who want to buy insurance in my state and they can't because nobody can afford it, because I chased out all the companies by being a really mean regulator. So, and then I'd add to that dynamic the politicians, right? The actual elected officials who write the insurance code. Again, who sits in that chair matters. I tend to think that when you have state insurance committees in your state legislature who have an insurance agent sitting as the chairman who knows something about insurance, that's a good thing. But
it's interesting the way you framed it, because inherently what that tells me is that the regulators are there, like you said, to protect the people, which means that there is inherently a set of conflict of interest with the insurers then, right? Because it's the insurers on one side and it's their customers on the other. And if I'm going to be at the get-go on the side of the customers, then I should be against the insurers, because that's where the sort of the complaints come from. And yet you make a good point of sort of, here's the element of politics that comes in, which is the extent of that play between these actors differ from states to states. And it's an element of who's sitting in those elected seat and how much do they understand insurance that sort of plays into it. So
right, a really good regulator is someone who understands that the insurer is not against their policyholder, right? The really good regulator is the one who says, okay, let's find out how your interests are all aligned. And then because, look, I mean, I don't know any policyholder who wants losses.
True. But to your point, like you said, you've seen certain regulators dry out the state, as you said, right? Which is put in some regulations which make it very hard for carriers to operate, profitable business. So there's always these, I guess we have 50 states. So 50 states means each state would have a different perspective on sort of, consumers' interest, right? So
absolutely.
talk to me a little bit about, there's the I'm assuming there's a politics to this, right? Democrat versus Republican, and there's some probably patterns that might be coming. But how does one? So let me put on my hat as a startup and say, look, if I want to come in and I want to make sure that I want to operate in a state which is very regulation friendly, what would that experience look like for me versus another state where it would I might have a horrible experience, right? So just talk to me a little bit about some stories to the extent possible
Sure.
you can share from your experience.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is, trade associations are your friends, just as a general, not just pitching Namek, but when you join groups, you get the benefit of experience and you get the benefit of having, someone to stand behind and someone to stand next to you when you go have those conversations with the politicians and the regulators. I think the most important thing is not to be afraid, because if you don't have that meeting and you assume that you're gonna, just run your business and start something up, and then all of a sudden someone says, wait a minute, your entire business model is against the law in this state. Now you got a real problem. So look, regulators are very easily approached. In some cases, probably even more so than legislators. But the way you do it is you reach out and you say, hey, I would like to bring a product to market in your state. I think your consumers could really benefit from this, or your voters, depending on who you're talking to, right? And then you start to have the conversations. Now, depending on which regulator it is, you're going to get different levels of pushback. Okay, and they're going to say, well, no, we're not interested in having someone write that coverage here. Okay, move on to the next state, maybe. But maybe you say, well, I've got 20 letters from voters in your state who want this coverage. Now we got a different conversation on our hands. So it's a combination. You have to approach the regulators, approach the legislators, have those candid conversations, but you also need to show that their interests, or their bosses, usually governors, that their interests are aligned with whether it's a new technology, new product, new service, whatever it is, there's a need for it in your state, right? And if people had the choice, they would want to do this.
Got it.
We actually got passed into law 3 years ago now, a sandbox concept here in Kentucky, by which, we could basically allow the insurance commissioner to wave her hand and say, none of the rules apply to this product, as long as you are constantly talking to us about it and sharing feedback and telling us, what happens. The governor lost his reelection bid last year, so we didn't really get to see much through, but conceptually and legally, that's where we are in Kentucky. At least we do have a sandbox bill.
That's it sounds like a Mission Impossible kind of a thing, like compared to the perception a few years ago. But you mentioned that a good practice, a best practice is therefore to talk to trade associations in your state and be proactive about it, is what you're saying, right? So for the benefit of some of the startups, especially people like me, what are some typical trade associations that I should be aware of, that I should reach out proactively, to get the concept socialized?
Sure. So on the insurance side, there's Namek, where I'm at. There are our sort of sister trade on the publicly traded side is APCIA, the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Their membership is made up of, again, publicly traded insurers, unlike our mutuals. Additionally, many of the states have a state trade association dedicated to representing insurance companies. In some instances, it's a regional, like out west, there's the Northwest Insurance Council for companies operating in Oregon and Washington. So there's regionals, there's state trades, there's the nationals. You're going to get the most traction probably at the state level. But then also things like even your local chamber of commerce, they plug into the national chamber in many instances. And like I had a conversation just a couple days ago with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about strategy on defending risk-based pricing. And even though there are dozens of insurance companies that are members of the U.S. Chamber, the U.S. Chamber isn't thinking about insurance all the time. They're thinking about much bigger issues. They turn to groups like us when they have an insurance question. So those are some of the ways to plug in. But yeah, and the other thing about groups like a U.S. Chamber or like a local chamber is they can make that introduction that gets you in the door with your legislator, and then you take it from there, right? Like, as long as you're in the room, you're the expert on your company, on your area, on your industry. And I think legislators understand how that works.
Got it. That's excellent advice. So now let me pick on something that you just mentioned some time back, as which was the Kentucky Sandbox, call it the experiment, right? Which is so refreshing, right? That you have this ability to literally, like, if you've come up with a new way or new product that you think is going to be beneficial to the consumers, and to get it out there, you have a state legislative or state body that's willing to say, hey, as long as you keep us updated, you're good to go. Now, just explain that.
Now I'll add, we were not able to waive the capital requirements.
Oh, okay.
So we waived a lot of the requirements, but capital was one where people couldn't get comfortable with that.
Got it. So capital was one, but where I was going with that was, that in the context of now newer technologies, right? So now, like, if you think about insurance as a product, the product has, at the core of it, remained the same for the last, whatever, I could say 300 years since Lloyd started writing it.
Right.
But a lot of things have changed, right? And how you administer how the policy itself, the claims itself, how you assess the risk, how you think about risk mitigation, all of that has evolved a bit as newer and newer technology started coming. So, talk to us a little bit about, like, if this is a forum to get the message out to all the states, right? To say, look, here's the reason why Kentucky thought about this, but it's not unique to Kentucky. It's, applies to everyone. So just from your perspective, right, as you see this onslaught of new technologies and you see this opportunity to better the product and the industry, right, what's your perspective on that?
So I think the message to regulators that we took away from a lot of the conversations that we had leading up to the Sandbox bill is that consumers want these new items and these new products and these customized coverages. Consumers want to buy insurance the way they buy everything else. Sitting here, I'm not going to say that that's a good thing or a bad thing, although the sort of traditionalist insurance guy in me says it's a bad thing to buy an extremely complex contract by tapping on your phone. But the reality is that that's what consumers want. And consumers are putting the right amount of pressure or might need to put more pressure on to say, why not? Why can't I buy my car insurance an hour before I go drive? Why can't I buy boat insurance when I swipe my boat on, get on the boat, go out in the water, come back, turn it off? Why can't I do that? And the answer usually is because the law was not written for that. To which you got to come back and say, okay, well, we need to update the law because there's a market out there for this. There's money to be made. People want coverage for new risks, for different risks, look, think about this, right? Like 25 years ago, no one had heard of a personal electronic device policy. Nobody carried cell phones. Now it's almost unheard of not to have insurance for your cell phone.
Right.
So from a legislative perspective, the reason for things like what we did in Kentucky is that the laws just haven't kept up with the technology. And that's not unique to insurance either. To be clear, like that's not unique to insurance. The difference is with insurance, not only is it an extraordinarily regulated product, right? You got 12,000 regulators across the 50 states and the 6 jurisdictions. But it's a product that most consumers don't understand. And it is a complex contract and a promise. It's not something you hold. It's not something you use. It's not a commodity. It's not toilet paper. So once you can get past all of those conversations, I think you can get regulators to say, okay, like as long as I'm still the one in charge, as long as I'm still the boss, then we can look past some of those outdated laws.
Got it. So tell me a little bit about because we spoke about this, right? Updating the law, right? That's something which is happening. And just tell us a little bit about where we stand in terms of that effort to update the law. Is it state by state? Is it, I'm assuming that's what it is, but just tell us a little bit about what to expect there.
Sure. So for folks, again, newer to the industry, there's a body, the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and that's where each state insurance commissioner is a member of that body. They are not lawmakers. They create models, right? They set standards. They say, okay, here's a model. We all think this is a really great idea. You should go back to your state and talk to your state legislators and get it in your insurance code. With that said, the NAIC has a lot of clout. And when you say something is an NAIC model law, it tends to get passed in the states. It might get modified a little bit around the edges, but it tends to get passed. So one of the big initiatives that they've been undertaking of late is updating the Unfair Trade Practices Act and anti-rebating laws. And this is something you and I chatted about a little bit before, because the idea that an insurance company is breaking the law if they give a consumer a water sensor is crazy.
Right.
It's because that's not an enticement. That's not an improper act. But the way the law is written, you can't give a consumer a thing of value. And a water sensor is a thing of value. Even though the insurer benefits, the consumer benefits, and the regulator benefits by having one less complaint that's likely going to come in. So they're working on updating all of the anti-rebating provisions in the model law. Now, that'll trickle out to the states over the course of the next probably 3 to 4 years. But that's a big one that has been a pretty big lift for the NAIC and their innovation and technology task force that worked on a lot of this.
Got it.
That's just one example.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And, that's obviously, it hits home because that's the space that we're in. And you and I have talked about it, right? So as you start thinking about framing, I think I mentioned to you, one of the commissioners that I met from one of the states basically said that, look, they have no problem with sensors, at least in terms of approving the product, as long as it's set up as a risk mitigation concept, yep. Right? And it's for everyone, right? So the regulation, or at least the commissioner, was basically telling me we're all for doing something which can be uniformly applied to all, right? That was their point. They don't make it selective, for one versus the other. So what are your perspective on on that aspect? Because we're seeing some innovative strategies, product evolution, both on the auto side as well as on the property side, right? And you and I've chatted about it. But tell me about your perspective on how you see that evolving. Is that the thing that's gonna stick and be the standard, or it's still some time?
Potentially. So one of the things that I find works really well when you're talking with legislators and with regulators, with commissioners, is when you give them some of the astounding numbers in the IoT space, right? In your world, really, when you tell a commissioner that 125 new devices connect to the internet every second, when you tell a committee chairman that there's going to be 43 billion connected devices 5 years from now, those are numbers that make them pay attention. Right? And okay, so then you've got their attention and they say, okay, well, why do I care? What does this have to do with insurance? And you say, okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk it through. More insurance is good. We want more insurance. You want more insurance. That means more jobs in your state. That means more people. That means more transactions. Things happen because of insurance that otherwise would not happen. So you want more insurance. How do we create more insurance? Well, we reduce losses and we reduce costs. And that creates the opportunity for more coverage. And that creates ways to align. Again, it's all about alignment, right? We want to align our members at NAMIC. We want our carriers to have their interests aligned with the policyholder, who doesn't have to worry about when they have a loss. They know they're covered because that's what good coverage is, we take care of our policyholders. So you tell the politicians, okay, here's the numbers. We want more jobs, more insurance, more benefit in the state. More people will take leaps of faith in forming a business because they have coverage, right? They'll buy a house, they'll buy a car because they can get it covered that they otherwise wouldn't. So when you frame it that way, you've got their attention.
True. And I think that, the whole idea of insurance is protection, right? And the way what we're talking about is really technology enhancing that protection, right? So if we can now come to them and say, here's another reason for you to push it because it increases protection, and it's happening anyway, right? The technology is going to advance and the consumers are going to adopt it. So might as well tap into it in a way that aligns a win-win outcome for everyone.
Absolutely.
That's how at least we see it.
Absolutely.
So, I talked about this a little bit, that telematics and IoT, it took off on the auto side first, right? We're now starting to see almost every incumbent legacy carrier has a program. There are insurtechs like Root who are only having the product based on telematics. And we're starting to see some of that happening on the property side too. People like Hippo taking the lead. What's your perspective on sort of that change? How long will it take? Will it take place? Is that because a lot of people question the insurtech viability, right? And can they sustain it for the future? And because what's your perspective on that?
I think it depends on the consumers. We're going to have to see how the consumers react, because I'll tell you, consumers 50 and older have no interest in, even if they have a smartphone, they have no interest in downloading an app that's going to track them all the time when they drive. So there's an age issue. Okay. Now, there's also the age issue also speaks to the privacy issues, because I'll talk to my younger cousins or friends that are a little younger. They just assume that privacy doesn't exist. Like they'll give their information to anybody,
right?
for a couple dollars, right? Whereas I'm still sort of in the wedge. I'm like right on that cusp of the millennials. I think they call us older millennials, but I'm not comfortable giving my information by and large to just about anybody. So there's consumer expectations are shifting, and I think that's going to be a big part of the conversation that you're talking about in terms of telematics. But it's also things like, okay, does a carrier require me to have one of the dongles that plugs into my OBD2 port, or can I just download an app? The way it manifests itself is going to matter. I think a lot of customers will appreciate feedback. You could do a better job with fewer braking, less braking, fewer hard turns, things like that. So feedback is probably good. As a theft prevention device, I think it's awesome. I think it's great, this direction of connected devices. I think that's really helpful. I think it's really helpful for reducing fraud too, from the carrier side. If nothing else, the ability to sniff out fraud should make insurance carriers very excited about IoT, telematics, and that technology. As to I think it will continue to be adopted a little by little by little. I don't think we'll ever get to 100% penetration. Like I think there's going to be people who don't want this, and that's what our experience has been in telematics so far too, right? And in auto telematics, a lot of people just don't want it.
True. And honestly, that's the reason why I started the company, because I didn't want it too. Like when my carrier said they put it in the car, I didn't want it, but I said, my home is okay. I think I can live with the idea that somebody's collecting data to watch out for a water leak. Hell, let someone steal that data. I don't. Okay. It's okay, right? Compared to
Right,
that.
because and it's a different item, because I think what you're talking about, that mitigation prevention, is less about your behavior than about the condition of the property.
There you go.
And I think people are more willing to accept that.
Absolutely. So I think you're absolutely right. I personally think that it's a better application in the property realm because it's a thing, and we're talking about things being connected and sort of having that prevention use case associated with a thing. But consumer behavior, you're totally right? The adoption will depend upon the consumer behavior and how much we're able to get past their hurdles and concerns around privacy and data transparency. And we've heard that the research has also shown that, although there's this interesting data point from a recent podcast by the CEO of Hippo, who said that they have found that the maximum adoption for their devices has come from 50 plus category, which was
Interesting.
nice to them. Yeah, that was interesting. So there was some interesting thing that they shared. Now that's completely different than Lemonade's experience, where it's mostly the first time millennial. Probably not even the millennial. There's probably the Gen Z. I think.
Yeah.
Gen Z. That's what my daughter says she is. So the Gen Zs, right? The late teens, early 20s. That's so you're going to see a very different behavior from these digital natives than compared to us, who have to figure out a way to use an app, and just the learning curve, right, to be associated with technology adoption. But anyway, point well taken. From your perspective, I just wanted to ask you this sort of the last question on this technology air before we move on to others. Is you're in a good vantage position at Namek and even before that, right? To see a lot of startup activities, and I'm sure you would agree that it has only increased over these last few years, right? And insurance has attracted a lot of startups. It is seeing a lot of investment in startups. Also, incumbents, right? The legacy carriers are also investing in technology. Just wanted to ask you, if post-COVID, what's your perspective? Do you think there would be, what's likely to be the technology embrace, so to say, by these carriers? Do you think they're going to accelerate? You're going to see more and more startups, or do you think there's going to be a I don't know, stabilization phase, etc.?
I think, well, I'll answer that sort of two parts. Number one, I think society at large is woefully underinsured. Okay, I think society is generally underinsured. That is probably a result of there being room for these startups and insurtechs to do something a little bit differently. Okay. Now, where a lot of these insurtechs have already gotten themselves into trouble is where they take this attitude of like, we are disruptors, we are going to change everything, we're going to ask the fundamental questions, the insurance industry is corrupt, the insurance industry is terrible, they treat their consumers badly. All that doesn't help. Nobody's impressed. You're a tough guy, good job. Like you don't even know what a loss ratio is.
Right.
I'm not impressed. So yes, there is room for those companies, and there are ways that they can succeed. Part of that will be partnering with carriers. Part of that will be as a vendor to carriers, as sort of an add-on, right, to your risk model or your underwriting model or your rate making models. Like more data is always better. More data is better. That's what the legacy carriers and the big incumbents are trying to do right now, and where their challenges lie is in verifying the accuracy of the data they receive. If I can sort of to say, yeah, I'm aware of a couple of national carriers who have entire divisions of 25 to 30 people who do nothing but scrub data that is incorrect about applicants and policyholders. If I can verify the data and I know what I'm underwriting and know what I'm rating on, there's my advantage. I don't need you, insurtech. I don't need you, startup. I don't need any. I got good data. Right? So that's sort of where I see it going. I think to be a real value add, the insurtechs are going to have to find legacy carriers that they can partner with, or become really good at providing a service that the legacy carriers need.
Yeah, and I think you said something which caught my attention last time also. Again, a plug into the IoT technology, which is accuracy, right? Accurate data, real-time data, accurate data, verifiable data, right? So once you have a stream of data that is high quality, then you can do things with that data.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think to me, that's the promise of this. A lot of the times carriers, especially the incumbent carriers, when you go to them with anything related to data, they'll say, we have enough data, right? We have enough data. We have enough problems.
Right. But if it's bad data, that doesn't help anybody.
Exactly. Right. So then the conversation needs to be, I don't care how many room full of data you have. If it's not good quality data,
right,
you're going to keep collecting this bad quality 30% accurate data
right.
versus an opportunity to build a new stream on, I don't know, 90% plus, accurate data. So that's the real opportunity, I feel.
And I think if they're smart, they'll also understand that conversation about accurate data will help them with the regulator.
There you go, because that's what the regulations want. The regulators want that too, right? Just hey, as long as it's accurate, it's relevant to the consumers, and everyone, is in the same.
And then you can have a separate question and a separate conversation about, all the other drivers in the insurance industry of equity and social justice and all the other things that people want to use the insurance mechanism to solve society's problems. But it's got to start with the math, and it's got to start with the data.
Absolutely. Well, this was great. So on this amazing opportunity, I feel like we can go on and on and on, but let me move the conversation a little bit about getting to know Tony a little bit more. So, I have a set of questions just on that topic, but the last question on the previous segue is, if you could change one thing in the world today, your world, your professional world, that would make it better, what would that be?
Oh, wow. One thing that would really make things, that would solidify, I think, and it would solve a lot of the battles that we have, that I have to get involved in right now, would be that you put into the insurance law in every state that if a rate is actuarially sound, it is not discriminatory. If we could get that in every state's laws, we'd be in great shape. Because as we were just talking about, there's movements afoot out in society that say, all insurance is racist, and insurance discriminates against poor people and minorities, when that is inconsistent with the facts. But if we could say
politics comes in, right? So I think
right. But if we could say the math is what determines whether your rate is fair or not, just math, then I might put myself out of a job.
No, I think as you and I just said, right, it's a data-driven decision which has, an outcome based on set of inputs, and it's transparent, available for all to see,
and accurate.
And negates that, that subjective opinion or perception that, look, it's racist. So
yep. That's what I want for Christmas. Can we get that? Can we make that happen?
I promise. 25 Christmases out. I promise. You might get it. All right. Switching gears here a little bit. You've had this amazing journey. Almost 2 decades in the industry. Tell me, what is your proudest achievement and the biggest learning?
Sure. And they're probably the same, which was when I was at the NAIC, I want to say it was 2014, maybe it was probably around 2014. We started hearing rumors, and, coming out of the financial crisis, everyone was concerned about big institutions and systemic institutions. And even though AIG insurance was not what set off all the dominoes, the insurance industry still got looped into a lot of that. Part of what my team and I at the NAIC were tasked with was changing a federal law that basically said if a bank holding company, which a lot of insurers are set up as bank holding companies, if they are having financial issues, you cannot steal, essentially, you can't take money from the insurance side of the house to pay out the banking side of the house. And we got that made into federal law. It's the Policyholder Protection Act. And it's now ensconced in federal law. I have a copy of it up in my office.
Nice.
But it captured for me everything that's important about this industry, which is it's not banking, right? This is an industry built on promises and contracts. There's no run on the insurance company. And we had to do whatever we could to protect against that. So making sure that you can't steal from insurance policyholders to pay out bank depositors was a really, really big win. And when we got that enacted into federal law, we were pretty happy.
Yeah, I bet you were. So what was the learning?
Well, the learning was just how difficult it can be to get 5 sentences into federal law.
I bet it took you, how many Christmases did that take to?
It only took about 1.5 years, but I think we were having on average probably 5 or 6 meetings with congressional staff about that issue every week.
Wow.
And trying to explain to them why it mattered and why their bosses should vote to protect insurance policies, because their assumption is always, well, the insurance companies are evil.
Right. Wow. That sounds like some fun times, but I'm glad it's passed and I'm glad it's a law.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So should every policyholder in the country should be happy.
Sure, he should be thanking you. Thank you, Tony. Um, so Tony, I know you you operate at the intersection of so many interesting aspects of life and society. But how do you keep yourself updated? What do you like to read? Like, what are your hobbies? Tell us a little bit about that.
So updated is tough. I mean, I read every newsletter I can get my hands on, and there are 20 of them in my inbox any given morning. A lot of the local Kentucky Today, all our local newspapers, I try and make my way through first thing in the morning. On the insurance side, on the industry side, I find that the III has really good, their blog, the Insurance Information Institutes, I believe is what it's called, Triple I. Their blog is really good. I'll look at a lot of the NAIC website to see any newsletters, any alerts that come out of them. A lot of just talking to folks and like yourself, and just try and stay up on, hey, what's happening? Did a bill get filed? Read a lot of weekly sort of reports, and try and, even when I'm not sort of really actively engaged, I try and keep webcasts and podcasts on in the background to see if anything sort of catches my ear. Property Casualty 360 has a great series. LexisNexis does a series. Actually, Namek, we host our own webinars on occasion. So those tend to keep me pretty well occupied. On the political front, I read Real Clear Politics. I find that is the single most representative site of both sides of each argument, because they have columns from the right and columns from the left. And they have pretty good data and trackers too.
Got it. Excellent. So, I wanted to ask you, and I always ask my guests, like, if you were to turn on to a future episode or podcast, what Purple Pondering, what are some guests that you would like to hear from?
So I think if you are able to get anyone in the space of monitoring crashes, I find that fascinating on the auto side. Folks who monitor highways and who monitor like traffic light cameras and things like that, right? Speeding tickets, all of that, where that connects with the technology, I think that'd be a fascinating conversation for you to have with whoever is playing in this space. I mean, there must be folks in it. I just don't know them well yet.
We'll have to do a research, right? Which other startups are, focused on this area, which is interesting. Auto claims is pretty big. I'm sure there are people in different hats operating at that realm of figuring out how do we make it safer. And you mentioned something. I'll just say this: I was having this conversation with somebody else about IoT telematics, and the question they asked was, okay, how has IoT proven to prevent accidents, right? Improve loss ratio the right way, which is, and I said, look, the way I see this whole driverless cars and sensors and like all of that is moving in a direction where the cars are much more smarter to figure out who's coming from which side and is going to cause a crash and sort of take action against it, right? To move the lanes, etc. To me, that was how I was thinking about sort of the real use of technology, which is just to prevent these accidents and make it safer. And who knows, one of these days when you have these flying taxis, that's what's going to happen, right?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think there's the other side of it too that we have to think about, which is where the data goes after a crash. Okay, what did we learn from that crash? Because the way it works today, depending on where you crash, that determines which police officer comes out to write the report. The reports are not standardized in any way, shape, or form. They're not in a comprehensive database. You could be on one side of the street and be dealing with a county sheriff, and on the other side of the street, you're dealing with state police.
There you go. Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
those reports are not together. So we don't know where crashes have happened. Could they have been avoided, and how do we change it? Like, do we need to add a stop sign here? Do we need to add a traffic light? Do we need to add a circle? Those are the kinds of conversations that I think insurers can really benefit from.
It's a good one, good one. I mean, I think to me, as I was thinking about it, like there's this data about how texting distracts driver and causes crashes, right? So now, and it said there's some number attached to it. 78% of drivers are texting, and so and then there's a higher correlation with that leading to a crash, right? So, but your point is valid, which is we don't have standardized data coming out of every crash, which is being collected at one place or a different place, so that you can infer actionable insights right from
Exactly.
that. That's the part which is like you want to get there, but then there are these interim steps that have to happen before that happens. So that's the point. Got it. Cool. Well, I'll look it up and see who fits that profile. But all right, moving into this last
Sure.
segment, Tony. This is just to get to learn the fun side of Tony. I don't know if you're into books or movies or sports or all of the above.
Yeah.
Well,
Just
all
enough of all of the above.
right, okay, good. All of the above. So I'm going to just give you two options. I want you to pick the one that you align with or feel closer to, and tell us why.
Sure.
Let's start with the easy one. So paper books or ebooks,
Paper. They get heavy though.
and why?
Paper just I like to have something I can actually feel. I mean, I'll read the ebook sometimes, but it just I, I don't know. I don't like this is super nitpicky, but I don't like the little bar on the bottom that tells you what percentage of your book you've read.
I get it. I get it. All right. Next one is Superman or Spider-Man.
Ooh, I guess Spider-Man. I don't really not much on the comic book front, but I feel like Spider-Man's human at least.
Okay, that's fair. Um, Baseball or football?
Ooh, to play baseball, to watch probably football, but yeah, I am certainly a baseball addict in far too many ways. In
Got it.
the time I was in DC, I ran a season ticket group for the Nationals uh, for about 10 years and spent a lot of time, money, and heartache in that stadium. In fact, the mock-up of the stadium is what's behind me from
Oh,
the
nice,
original design.
nice. What about basketball? Is that something that you follow as well, or no?
I do. I went to high school in Spokane, Washington, home of Gonzaga University before they were a basketball powerhouse. And of course, now living in Kentucky, we've got the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville that both play here in our backyard. So
Yeah. So
it's
you want to weigh in as to the greatest of all time, the GOAT, you know, question of whether it's LeBron or it's Jordan.
I I have to still think it's Jordan. Just the game has changed a lot. Let's put it that way, right? It's the game has changed a lot, and LeBron does a lot of things that I can never see Jordan doing, but he does not take over a game the way Michael Jordan did.
Got it. And the final one, post COVID, let's say everybody's got the vaccines, we're all good to go. We can travel anywhere, right, in the world. So, what would you pick as a favorite vacation spot? A beach like a Hawaii, or mountains, or the icy conditions like in Iceland.
um, I, so I flash back to, and I'm sure we will at some point go back there, but my wife and I, we did our honeymoon in Italy and did a 10-day food tour where we got to sample foods all over the country. I would do that again in a heartbeat once,
Tell me
once
more.
sanity
So,
returns.
the food festival, as in you just kind of go one city to city and
Yeah, we were on a bus with about 15, 20 other folks, and we went all around. There was a little bit of sightseeing, but mostly we just ate.
yeah, Italian food with Italian wine, I'm guessing, is a
Pretty
key
much. The wine was cheaper than the water.
Well, there you go. That's Europe for you, right? Water expensive, super expensive. Um, awesome. Well, on that note, I will let that brings to an end us to an end to this episode.
Sure.
Any final words from your side before we wrap up?
Just keep doing what you're doing. Being a disruptor who follows the rules and is willing to play by the rules and influence them is much more productive and leads to better conversations, and it's going to lead to a better product for consumers. Just spitting at the industry isn't going to win anything.
Got it. Yeah, no, I'm not from that cut of cloth anyway. So,
Yep.
but thank you for your wishes and thank you. And with that, we've come to an end to this episode. Thank you, guests. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Till then,
Great.
bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.